500 more Stingers per day. Good morning and welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. We're reporting live today from Warsaw, Poland.
And I'm Poppy Harlow. We are so glad you're joining us on this consequential day. In Ukraine, intense fighting in several cities again overnight, with Ukrainian forces making gains east of the capital. The UK Defense Ministry confirms Ukrainian forces have been able to retake towns and defensive positions up to 21 miles east of Kyiv. But Russia's defense ministry is claiming its own victories there, saying a cruise missile strike destroyed the largest of the remaining fuel depots in Ukraine. We are also seeing new heart-shattering video out of Mariupol this morning. Mourners burying the dead, burying their loved ones. This is right near a playground. They are placing wooden crosses on the graves. And local officials in that city now say some 300 people, including innocent women and children, were killed in the Russian attack on that theater that was being used as a shelter just 9 days ago. Much more on that in a moment. Wolf.
It's really so sad. We're following, Poppy, all these late-breaking developments as only CNN can. Here with me in Warsaw is our chief White House correspondent Caitlin Collins, and CNN's Barbara Starr is joining us from the Pentagon. Caitlin, as we await for the president to land here in Poland in just moments, give us the big picture a little bit. We're going to hear from the president speaking about refugees, speaking about Poland, a critically important NATO ally, speaking about the horrible situation that's unfolding in Ukraine.
Yeah, Wolf, you'll see another side of this invasion and what it has caused and the havoc that it has wreaked here in Europe today from President Biden and tomorrow as he wraps up his trip here. Of course, yesterday was very focused on diplomacy and this effort to project unity with other NATO allies against Russia to try to punish them for this invasion, even more this invasion of Ukraine that is now extended into a month now, Wolf. But President Biden is on his way here to Poland. He is going to Rzeszów first. That is where he is going to get a humanitarian briefing on the effort that you've seen underway here because of this crisis, this refugee crisis that has been caused by this invasion. Obviously, over 3.5 million people have been displaced from their homes in Ukraine because of this Russian invasion, and over 2 million of those have come here to Poland alone. Now, not all of them are staying here, but officials believe many of them will. And so that is the other side of this effort. And the Polish president has asked for help with this, given they have taken in this huge influx of refugees that are now living here in Poland, working here, going to school, and trying to readjust their lives following this invasion. And so the other aspect of President Biden's day today is meeting with members of the 82nd Airborne Division. And that comes as they are trying to bolster the NATO presence here in Eastern Europe on this flank. Many of these nations that border Ukraine or border Russia that are obviously concerned by the Russian aggression and concerned for their own nations, given you've seen warnings from Ukrainian President Zelensky that he doesn't think Russia is stopping with Ukraine. That will be the focus of President Biden's day today. We should note that the White House has just confirmed he will come face-to-face with Ukrainian refugees tomorrow, and he's also set to deliver what they are billing as a major address, Wolf.
The Air Force One, the president's plane, has just landed in Rzeszów. It's about 60 miles or so from the Ukrainian border. The president's going to be spending some time there, and then he's going to be moving on. Eventually, later in the day, he'll be coming here to Warsaw to spend the night. He's going to be meeting with the Polish president as well, Andrzej Duda, the Polish president. Caitlin, we're learning that President Biden and the European Commission chief earlier, just about an hour or two or so ago, they announced this joint task force meant to help wean Europe from its critically important dependence on Russian oil and gas. What more do we know about that? This is a significant, potentially significant development.
It is. At the beginning, it may be more symbolic than significant, but it is this major effort that the United States is making to try to make Europe less dependent on Russian energy. Obviously, that's been a critical lifeline for the Russian economy. And so before he left Brussels this morning, President Biden announced this joint effort to try with the United States to get more liquefied natural gas to Europe. They want to change the trajectory of this basically and try to help wean them off of this dependency that they have on Russian gas. And that is going to obviously be a struggle, something that President Biden noted, but they want to help cut off Putin from what they say is helping fund his war machine. Listen to what the president said earlier today.
It's going to take some time to adjust gas supply chains and infrastructure that is built the last decade, for the last decade. So we're going to have to make sure that families in Europe can get through this winter and the next while we're building an infrastructure for a diversified, resilient, and clean energy future. I know that eliminating Russian gas will have costs for Europe, but it's not only the right thing to do from a moral standpoint, it's going to put us on a much stronger strategic footing.
Now, the president there noting the difficulty that this is going to have. That's something European leaders have wrestled with since this invasion began. Obviously, Wolf, natural gas is the biggest challenge. It is much harder to import. That is a real struggle that they're facing. And it is going to take at least several years, likely, for this consumption to change, for this dependency to change. But that is a broader effort that the White House and that these European leaders say they are willing to embark on, Wolf.
It's really long-term, very, very significant indeed. Barbara Starr, you're over at the Pentagon. We just saw Air Force One land in Rzeszów. In addition to getting a humanitarian update on this crisis that's going on, the president will also meet with troops, U.S. troops from the 82nd Airborne Division who have been deployed at least temporarily to Poland, a key NATO ally. Tell us about this deterrent mission that's underway, because I can assure you, based on my conversations with senior Polish officials, they're very nervous. God forbid this war in Ukraine could spill over into Poland, a NATO ally, and that would mean all 29 other NATO allies would directly be involved.
Well, Wolf, this is part of what the NATO alliance and the U.S., along with all members of NATO, are now doing, beefing up their military presence across the eastern flank. The 82nd Airborne is central to the U.S. part of this for deterrence against the Russians and reassurance of the allies, and of course in Poland, to send the message to the Polish government that one of the most elite U.S. military units is there and ready. The 82nd Airborne has been in just about every combat operation since World War II. They do not expect combat here, but they are training and increasing their readiness, we're told, ready at any time if they were needed for any contingency, and if they were needed if the refugee crisis became worse and the Polish government asked for assistance. But it is important. This will be a visual signal today. This will be the American commander-in-chief meeting with one of the most elite units in the U.S. military. The 82nd has the mission every day of being ready to deploy from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, within 18 hours anywhere in the world for a contingency. That is what they are routinely ready to do at all times. Now, the U.S. Has been very careful about showing that U.S. troops are there, but also limiting public access, limiting media access to all of this. There's concern that it not appear escalatory to the Russians. That was in the beginning when they deployed several weeks ago, but now much more open. And don't forget, Poland is a major route for those weapons being shipped into Ukraine to help those forces fight against Russia. Wolf?
Yeah, I think it's not just symbolic, but it sends an important message that the President of the United States is going to be meeting with troops from the 82nd Airborne Division who have been temporarily, repeat, temporarily deployed here to Poland and elsewhere in Eastern Europe, the NATO allies. Thousands more troops have come over the past month or so to this area. Very, very potentially significant. Barbara will get back to you. Caitlin will get back to you as well. Let's go to John Berman. He's got a lot going on over in Ukraine. John, Ukrainian forces, they are a month into this war, holding off Russia, but Russia's still unleashing devastating, brutal, horrible attacks across the region.
Yeah, Wolf, it's so true. Every day that this continues, it comes at a staggering cost to the Ukrainian people. And we do have some new video just into CNN that shows immense damage to the theater of Mariupol that was being used as a bomb shelter for civilians. This was struck by a Russian airstrike last Wednesday. City officials now report 300 people are believed to have died in that attack. 300 people in that attack. The next video we're going to play for you shows the moments immediately after the bomb as people tried to escape the destruction. Watch this.
Последствия обстрелов драмтеатра. Ракета попала прямо в центр драмтеатра. Сейчас люди пытаются эвакуироваться.
You can see people covered in dust and debris, holes in the walls as people try to make their way down a staircase to leave the heavily damaged building. Remember, the word children was written outside clearly in letters that you could see from the air, and now we're learning at least 300 people killed in that devastating attack. I want to go to CNN senior international correspondent Frederick Pleiken, who's on the ground in Kyiv. And Fred, it's really upsetting to see that damage, to see the suffering of the people as they tried to get out. One of them even said that one of the bombs hit the area where people were going to get water.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, John. It certainly is devastating video and very traumatizing video as well that we're seeing there for the first time from inside that theater that got hit in Mariupol. And I think one of the really devastating things also about this death toll that we're hearing now is that the city council, the municipal council there in Mariupol, which of course is barely functioning because that city is under siege and continues to be hit by Russian air power and Russian rockets, is that they say that they base that on having spoken to people that managed to get out of that theater because they themselves can't actually send any sort of rescue crews into that. You know, it's been about a week since that theater was hit, simply because they don't have any, because all of the emergency services in that city are not working anymore because of the devastating situation. And there's people who are trying to get there with their bare hands. There were people who were trapped inside that place for such a very long time. Now, the authorities there are saying they believe, as you put it, that more than 300 people were killed. They believe maybe 200 survived inside that theater, and obviously people trying to get out somehow anyway after that strike took place. But of course, as we've been reporting, John, over the past days since that incident took place, you know, many of them were simply trapped under that rubble. Many of them were trapped inside that building because all the ways in and out of that building were destroyed by that devastating strike. And I think one of the things, you know, that's really tough to listen to also is that man who was narrating that video saying that he says it struck right in the middle of that theater, John.
Fred, you've been doing such great reporting in Kyiv. The last couple of days, there's been a curfew there. You've been doing it from inside, but now I see you're out on the streets in front of what appears to be an anti-tank barrier. I don't know how much you can show us or tell us about where you are, but what's the situation there, especially as the Ukrainians try to go about these counteroffensives?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is an interesting situation right now here in Kyiv, and I'm actually right in the middle of the city center. You can see, indeed, there's a tank barrier right behind me. There's some checkpoints behind me as well. But just to give you an idea how close we are to the city center, the Maidan, the Freedom Square, is actually right over here. So that is obviously right in the heart of Kyiv. And I think it shows, John, that the city, of course, is still very much on a war footing. As the folks here have fortified it, they put up checkpoints in many places because they say they are not going to allow the Russian army to come into the city. At the same time, you do have those gains that have been made by the Ukrainian military, both towards the northwest of the city. We keep talking about that suburb of Irpin, which the Ukrainians say is 80% under their control, but is still being shelled by the Russians. And then also a town to the east of the capital of Kyiv, where the Ukrainians are saying they took that place about 35 miles to the east. And that's a pretty important move for them because they're not only trying to push the Russian forces back, but also trying to encircle some of those Russian forces. Because as we've learned, of course, also from the U.S., is they say that logistics are a real problem for the Russians, and it's quite difficult for themselves to be resupplied. At the same time, we had air raid sirens here, I'd say about 30, 45 minutes ago. So you can see that the Russians obviously still operating their air power around here. And they also say, they claim that they hit a major fuel depot. In fact, the largest one that's apparently still operating here south of the capital of Kyiv. And there was some video that came out, some billowing smoke coming from that place. So the Russians certainly very much still hitting the city. But at the same time, the Ukrainians say they are pushing them back, John.
Frederick Pleiken on the streets in Kyiv. Amazingly, traffic going behind you right near Maidan, which I haven't seen, frankly, in the last few weeks. Really interesting to see what's going on there. Thank you so much, Fred. Stay safe. So as Ukrainian forces retake territory east of Kyiv, right where Fred is, a soldier who captured a Russian Russian tank posted a message to social media about the counteroffensive. Listen to this.
The operation has been a complete success. We decisively repelled the enemy. According to preliminary data, there were about 200 Russian troops. Some of them are in the ground, while others escaped. 3 tanks and 9 BPM. There is one of them here, which is now ours.
Well, joining us now to talk about all of this is retired General Philip Breedlove. He is a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander for Europe. And General, let's just begin with the reporting we just got from our Fred Plechton on the ground in Kyiv. There are multiple ways and multiple intelligence reports that have told us how much success the Ukrainians are having in protecting Kyiv and how many roadblocks, literal roadblocks and logistic issues Russia is running into in and around Kyiv. Do you believe that the success the Ukrainian forces are having, particularly there, will continue?
I do, and thanks for having me on this morning. And the successes are not only on the east side, as you have shown, they're pushing them back on the east, but in what is now being called the Bucha Pocket to the west, also near Irpin, as you were talking about earlier. A large contingent of Russian forces are now in danger of being surrounded by Ukrainians and cut off. And so the Ukrainians are making some really smart moves, both to the east and to the west of Kyiv. And it's going to be a challenging time for the Russians there, as you have pointed out, because of some of their very drastic logistic issues.
Every day this goes on, General, more Ukrainian civilians are being killed. Innocent civilians. We see more pictures of it. We saw pictures of it from that Mariupol theater moments ago. And I do believe we've got some new images in from Kharkiv in the far east, where there was this humanitarian aid line, a line of civilians waiting for humanitarian aid right in the city, hit by a rocket attack or some kind of attack right in broad daylight. This is a humanitarian aid station. We understand that 6 people may have been killed there. And just, General, just how do you explain these clearly civilian locations, civilian targets with just no military value being hit?
There is no explanation. This is a war crime, and we're watching it play out. And the Russians need to be held accountable. Just yesterday at Mariupol, a relief column going in was attacked, and the relief people and their buses and things were taken. And now we see yet another humanitarian corridor or line or relief station attacked. This is happening all the time. And in the end, we're going to have to hold Russia accountable for this.
General, to build off what John just, and that was the first time I'd seen that video. It's so jaw-dropping. You have warned, General, that the more frustrated Putin gets by all of these setbacks that he clearly did not expect, the more dangerous he gets. So what does that mean for civilians like those who were waiting in line for aid?
It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse and worse. Mr. Putin has been unable to meet Ukrainian forces in these big force-on-force battles, which he really wants. And the Ukrainians are fighting this wonderful skirmishing, rear attack, ambush kind of fight that frustrates the military advance of Russia. And believe it, frustrates Mr. Putin because his army is not accomplishing his goals, and he gets more and more dangerous every day. And when they can't fight the Ukrainians, they are going to fight and kill Ukrainian civilians, as you have seen. The risk is going up every day because of the frustration of Putin and his army.
Well, General Philip Breedlove, we appreciate your expertise on all of this. Thank you for your time. And John, we'll get right back to you in Lviv very, very soon. Meantime, President Biden has just arrived in Poland, where more than 2 million refugees have passed through since the war began. A significant trip for the president, much more on that ahead, and also the harrowing stories of the Ukrainians who have been forced to leave their homes amid Russian bombing.
They drop them on the hospitals where the sick are, she says, on the bakeries where they make bread, so we don't have anything to eat, on the water facilities, so we don't have anything to drink.
Egypt is diversifying its energy mix and extending its pioneering strategy to every part of the country. Through working in partnerships, Egypt aims to provide 42% of its electricity from renewable energy by 2035. The country is successfully transitioning to more sustainable sources, creating green jobs, and powering a more sustainable future.
Bringing together thought leaders and policymakers under the banner of diplomacy, dialogue, and diversity, Doha Forum will reconvene for its 20th edition in March 2022 to discuss transforming for a new era.
I'm Hala Garani in Lviv, Ukraine. This is CNN.
The White House and the European Commission have now announced a new strategy aimed at depriving Russia of lots of money it makes selling off energy to Europe. A joint task force will help ease Europe's dependence on Russian oil and gas, with the U.S. pledging to make the surge to make sure the continent has enough supplies for the next 2 winters. Let's discuss this and a lot more. Joining us now, Ian Brzezinski. He's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO policy. Ian, thanks so much for joining us. I want to discuss energy in a moment, but first, how critical is this visit by President Biden here to Poland, which is clearly rising to the challenge of the refugee crisis while facing the potential threat of expanded Russian aggression?
It's a very important visit, Wolf. I mean, think about it. Poland today is playing the same operational role in the defense of Western interests that Germany did during the Cold War. It, in many ways, is right on the front lines of defending freedom and security in Europe, the way Germany did during the Cold War. So the President's visit there is underscoring that importance, underscoring U.S. commitment to Poland and the alliance, and underscoring the centrality of Poland's role in this conflict.
Yeah, Poland is emerging as a really critical NATO ally, right? Borders, of course, Ukraine. What do you make, Ian, of President Biden's announcement today on energy? How much of a security issue is energy dependence on Russia for Europe and an advantage for all practical purposes for Putin? The Russians make hundreds of billions of dollars exporting this oil.
Well, it's very important. I mean, let me just start by saying that President Biden's done a great job in coalescing the West into a unified coalition against Russian aggression. And they've been doing a lot to hit the Russian economy hard. But this is a gap in our strategy. The failure of the West to really cut off the purchase of Russian oil and gas, and it has to be addressed. I'm afraid a task force is quite not enough because it's going to take too long. Russia, as you pointed out, sold in 2021 $489 billion to the West for oil and gas. That means $1 billion a day. Still today, the Russians are selling that oil and gas to Western Europe, bringing in every week billions of dollars that's used to kind of sustain this war effort. This is a moral shortcoming on part of Europe, and it's a strategic mistake on part of the West. So we need to accelerate our effort to close this gap in our sanctions policy.
Yeah, it's really, really important. At the truly extraordinary NATO summit in Brussels yesterday, I was there, flew here to Warsaw overnight. President Biden said he believes Russia should be removed from the G20 or that Ukraine should be allowed to attend and observe. What do you think? Should Russia be expelled? Should it be barred from attending the next G20 summit in Indonesia next November?
I'd fully support that. There's no reason why Putin, when he's invading a democracy in Europe, should be standing with other countries shaping the world economic order. But unfortunately, kicking Russia out of the G20 may be easier said than done. It's an organization that operates on consensus. Its agenda is driven by the host nation. This year will be Indonesia. I think that as we work toward this goal, probably the best route is actually restructuring the G20 along the lines my colleague at the Atlantic Council, Josh Lipsky, has advocated, which is moving towards a G20 and a G25 based on the economic rank of nations. And the way the Russian economy is headed, I don't think it'll be able to stay within the top 25.
Yeah, we'll see what happens on that front. We'll see what happens to some of the other members of the G20, like China and India, for example, how they feel about removing Russia. Ian Brzezinski, as usual, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
All right, Poppy, let's get back to you.
Wolf, thank you, and what an important interview at this moment. Also, at any moment, President Biden will be briefed on the humanitarian response to help civilians inside Ukraine and the growing flow of refugees out of Ukraine. Much more on that ahead. Also keeping a close eye on markets here in the United States as the market, Wall Street, gets ready to open this Friday morning. Futures higher. Investors closely watching the war in Ukraine. Stocks have swung this week amid concerns about inflation and disruption to commodities. Stock futures hovered around break-even in pre-market trading after the day ended higher on all three major indices yesterday.
Christiana Manpour in Amsterdam, Sarajevo, Afghanistan, with elements of the Galilee division in Israel. Here we are in Habila, a village that has not had any food distribution since June. When the families have finished looking at the names, they come here. This is now a memorial to the victims of the Srebrenica massacre. We're very interested to see what's going on here. Mr. President, do you not think that the constant flip-flop on the issue of Bosnia sets a very dangerous precedent? This is a pretty shocking picture. Would you condemn President Assad for 100,000 plus deaths? You still have huge dreams. They didn't take that away from you. I saw you listening to that testimony. You look pretty broken up yourself. I wonder whether you ever think that other countries can learn from what you did.
The pandemic has really shifted what we do to be predominantly a virtual space. At Corona Rising, we focus in 4 areas, and one of them that's actually in my heart is we work with survivors to create sustainable and ethical jewelry. And the reason is that a lot of what we wear, a lot of what we, put on our bodies or put in our homes is created by individuals who've also been exploited. We're really committed to using materials and connecting to partners to create sustainable, ethical jewelry and body products. And previously we were selling everything in person, live events, because that's part of the fun of the experience. Because survivors were making real money. We were actually selling so many of our products that we couldn't put it on our website, because every time we'd think we were about to launch our online sales, everything we had would get sold out at an event. Well, obviously we're not doing live events. So we are really working to support survivors in a new initiative called Shop Survivor, and it will be focused on helping our survivors and other survivors coming into our space and selling their artisan jewelry. So we're creating supplies and content that is ethical and sustainable, but also allowing survivors to take care of themselves with the money that they make from the sales. They're able to support their own livelihood and really feel empowered to take that next step in their lives.
This is CNN.
Our mission here at CNN. The news comes first. More breaking news that we are following right now. Welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
Today, we live in an unpredictable environment, and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally, this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy, and so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening. There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the U.S. forces in Syria going? And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, tonight on CNN.
I'm Delia Gallagher in Rome, and this is CNN.
These are live pictures we're getting in Air Force One on the ground now in Rzeszów, Poland. The President of the United States arriving from the NATO summit in Brussels. He says the United States now the United States will take in as many as 100,000 Ukrainian refugees fleeing Russia's brutal assault on Ukraine. The president also announcing the United States will provide an additional $1 billion in humanitarian assistance, including food, clean water, medical supplies. CNN's Melissa Bell is in Rzeszów for us right now. This is the first stop here in Poland for the President of the United States. Melissa, set the scene for us. What do we anticipate?
Well, it's hugely symbolic for a start. We're talking here, Wolf, about the eastern edge of NATO. We are just 60 miles from the Ukrainian border. So I think this visit and the fact that Air Force One has just touched down here carries with it huge symbolism. You know, the American president, of course, coming to Europe to really gather together allies and remind them the importance of unity. The fact that he should come this close to the border is in and of itself important. Now, just inside and around this airport here at Rzeszów, he's going to be meeting with USAID in the shape of Ambassador Samantha Powers, but also with other humanitarian groups. And one of the big questions, of course, you mentioned a moment ago, is that extra money that was announced for humanitarian help. Partly, of course, to the more than 2.2 million refugees that have crossed this Polish border, but of course to the many millions of people who are in desperate need of humanitarian aid inside Ukraine. So many of those besieged cities have only just been reached by the UN only last weekend, getting to Sumy. So it is people who are in need of water, food, medical supplies, of course, to help the wounded. And that is one of the most urgent things that he's going to be addressing here with the humanitarian groups. He's also, Wolf, going to be meeting with the members of the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division, who've come here. 4,700 extra troops were deployed at the beginning of February to come and supplement the 4,000 American troops already on rotation here under NATO flags to bolster those forces. And really the idea of this is the deterrent capacity that this has, of course, in the face of that Russian aggression across the border in Ukraine. So hugely symbolic, but important meetings here as well, both on the humanitarian front and on the military front, as President Biden seeks to make clear that he intends to stand firm with his allies to show that solidity in the face of what was happening across the border. And of course, tomorrow we're going to have him go back to Warsaw, where we expect him to meet where you are with refugees themselves, but also to make what we expect to be a pretty big speech about that question of showing that united front, Wolf.
I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Melissa. Stand by. Caitlin Collins. She's here in Warsaw with me. We're seeing Air Force One on the ground there in Rzeszów, Poland. The Polish president, Andrzej Duda, was supposed to personally receive the president of the United States there in Rzeszów. But unfortunately, according to the state news agency here in Poland, President Duda's aircraft, which was supposed to land in Rzeszów, has been forced now to return here to Warsaw, make an emergency landing in Warsaw. This is a surprise development, a bit worrisome. Obviously, everybody's okay, but what are you hearing? Because the Polish president was going to formally greet the American president in Poland.
Yeah, he was supposed to greet him. They're actually going to have their big meetings tomorrow, Wolf, but that is why you haven't seen President Biden exit Air Force One yet. They are still figuring this out, of course, as he is maybe going to make an attempt to come and meet President Biden where he is in Rzeszów. Of course, we are here in Warsaw. That's where President Duda was, the Polish president. And so we are hearing that there was an issue with his aircraft. They had to make an emergency landing. It's not clear how serious the issue was. Obviously serious enough to make that emergency landing, but it appears they are trying to get the schedule back on track because, of course, this is the day where President Biden is going to be going and meeting face-to-face with these humanitarian officials and aid workers who have been dealing with the crisis on the ground here in Poland, as they have taken in millions of refugees since this Russian invasion began. So it does appear the White House is trying to get the Polish president there still to meet with President Biden, but we're still waiting for an update from officials. Right now, President Biden is still on board Air Force One. He's got a slew of officials on there with him, including Secretary of State Blinken, the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, several other officials who have been traveling with him on this trip as well, Wolf. And so we'll wait to see what the plan is for the meeting with the Polish president, who is obviously expected to greet President Biden. But overall, the day and the schedule still seems to be going forward with this meeting that President Biden is going to have, and then, of course, meeting with the 82nd Airborne Division. And Wolf, he's meeting with these refugees here on the ground in Poland. That's what he's going to be doing tomorrow, as he has also just announced the United States is going to take in 100,000, up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. Now, that is a huge number. It is more than the total of refugees that the United States has taken in the last several years, and now they are committing to taking in 100,000 Ukrainian refugees in the United States. Obviously, that's a big deal given the numbers that we have seen coming out of Ukraine. And it's a crisis that, of course, we've talked about, they don't say, or they don't believe is going to be ending anytime soon. This also comes alongside an announcement for $1 billion in aid, humanitarian aid. That is obviously going to be something that's immensely helpful to these nations that have also been taking in so many refugees, as well as those who are still in Ukraine and need assistance as well, Wolf. And so that will really be the focus of the second half of President Biden's trip while he is here in Poland, of course, spending the day in Rzeszów before coming here to Warsaw later on, Wolf.
Yeah, I'm looking at the official White House schedule for today that was released earlier by the White House, and it says the President Biden will be greeted by President Duda of Poland upon his arrival over there in Rzeszów, and then the President, according to the official White House schedule, will receive a briefing on the humanitarian response to ease the suffering of civilians inside Ukraine and to respond to the growing flow of refugees fleeing Putin's war of choice. And later, as Melissa Bell and everybody else was reporting, and this is also part of the official White House publicly released schedule, the president will meet with service members from the 82nd Airborne Division who have been temporarily deployed to NATO troops here in Eastern Europe. These are significant developments. Obviously, President Duda is not going to be able to attend, but we're looking at these live pictures. President, I guess, will be coming down. I can't see yet. Will be coming down those stairs, and he will begin to receive some sort of humanitarian briefing on this refugee crisis. Melissa Bell, you're there as we watch these pictures, live pictures coming in from Rzeszów, and as you correctly point out, only about 60 miles from the Ukrainian border. What else do we anticipate? The White House National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said tomorrow, Saturday, President Biden will be meeting with Ukrainian refugees. I assume that's going to be here in Warsaw, because he's leading, in a few hours, he's going to be leaving Rzeszów and coming to Warsaw.
That's right. So many of the refugees that we've been watching these last few days and weeks cross that border not very far from here, Wolf, and into Poland, have now headed to Warsaw. The population, the city's grown by some 17 to 18%. It gives you an idea of how many refugees have arrived in the Polish capital. But of course, it is along this border that the humanitarian crisis has been greatest of all. This is the country that's received the greatest amount. Of course, that question of how much Polish services have been stretched by what's been an extraordinary outpouring, show, display of solidarity these last few weeks at the heart of those discussions that are about to get underway in that airport just behind me. Clearly a huge blow for President Duda that he's not here to welcome the American president. It was a massive coup for him that President Biden should come in person, not only to this country as affected as it's been by the events of the last few weeks, but he should come all the way to this border. So we await more details on exactly what could have prevented his aircraft from coming here to Rzeszów and why it had to turn around and make that emergency landing in Warsaw. But that image of solidarity, clearly, at least for this leg of President Biden's visit, will not be taking place as we understand it. So that humanitarian catastrophe at the heart of those discussions. And again, it's a humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolding on this side of the border, but very much on the other, with that extra $1 billion of aid very much going to help those many millions of Ukrainians inside the country struggling to feed themselves and to get water, medical supplies, even as, of course, so many continue to be wounded in that fighting, Wolf.
Yeah, President Biden still aboard Air Force One. It has now landed in Rzeszów. We'll continue to monitor his plans where you are, Melissa. Caitlin, I know you're getting more information. Very disturbing that the president of Poland, President Duda, was forced to make this emergency landing here in Warsaw as opposed to meeting with President Biden and receiving and greeting President Biden in Rzeszów. These live pictures still coming in. Any additional information, Caitlin, you're getting?
Yeah, Wolf, we're hearing that we do expect the Polish president. He is still going to try to get where President Biden is at this airport in Rzeszów. They may be delayed by about half an hour or so, so they'll just flip the schedule, where instead he was supposed to initially get this humanitarian briefing with officials and aid workers on the ground, and then meet with members of the 82nd Airborne Division. As Melissa was just noting, we are now told by reporters who are traveling with President Biden they're just going to flip that schedule. So he'll go and meet with the members of the 82nd Airborne Division first, and then hopefully by the time President Duda has arrived, then he will take part in meeting those humanitarian workers, talking about this crisis that's happening on the ground. So just a bit of schedule shifting from the White House right now, Wolf.
Yeah, stuff happens on these kinds of trips, as we know. All right, Caitlin, stand by. Melissa, stand by as well. Much more of our special coverage right after a quick break.
Welcome back. The European Council issuing a formal demand that Russia stop committing war crimes in Ukraine. This demand comes as aid workers warn that Ukraine is facing a catastrophic health crisis on top of the obvious crisis of the war. This is due to a string of at least 64 strikes on healthcare systems since the Russian invasion began. Joining me now from Lviv is Helena Skopalska. She is the Ukraine country director for an organization called HealthRight. They are a global health and human rights organization. Helena, thank you so much for being with us. I'm showing people images of your team. This is the work that your mobile outreach workers do. These were taken, I should note, last year before the invasion. But what's so notable is they are still doing this work. You are still doing this work all across Ukraine, including in Kyiv, despite the great danger to them, even, you know, on the front lines, even in Donetsk and Luhansk. Can you talk about how critical this work is right now?
Oh, yes, thank you. So HealthRight International is a US-based organization that has worked in Ukraine since 2005. And yes, our main office was in Kyiv until March 1st. And this organization, which I lead here, representative office, which I lead here in Kyiv, was led by 16 women leaders with specialized expertise in gender equality. So this is why HealthRight International was leading organization in Ukraine in counteracting violence against women. And actually, in just a few words about 2014, when in partnership with UNFPA and UNICEF, we introduced first gender-based violence specialized services for survivors as part of that time humanitarian response system. And later, we integrated the services into the all government system. So, before crisis, before war, there were operating 13 mobile teams that provided psychosocial support, including identification, screening, first psychological aid, and support for gender-based violence survivors. We also had our own service sites, day center for women, halfway house for women, and also launched with state and local organizations up to 20 other shelters and day centers. So, and now a few words about mobile teams, because mobile teams we still have, and those 13 which I mentioned, they continue to operate in east of Ukraine and in most hot places, Donetsk and Lugansk regions.
Helena, I just wanted to ask you too specifically about the mental health aspect of this, because the World Health Organization is saying now about 500,000 of the refugees that have fled Ukraine just to Poland alone are facing really serious mental health needs. And this is particularly the work you do with some of the most vulnerable women and their children.
Yes, of course, because mainly women with children decide to move, to flow from this war. Speaking about mobile teams, for example, which operate in East, some of them already are homeless, I would say, because their property was destroyed during the shelling, and now they have to rebuild their lives. And some of them are were evacuated to nearest locations, Dnipro and Zaporizhia, or they are in the way to west. Nevertheless, we are constantly in touch with all teams, and everyone is alive and well, and this is important. Also, the situation changes daily, and we live in uncertainty every day. So during this month, just to share you some numbers, during this month, mobile teams provided remote and phone psychosocial services for about 2,000 different citizens, mainly women with children. And what type of services, I can say, with which problems they deal. Different. So it's information of relatives about victims, support families. They provided psychological assistance to the victims of shelling, get people out of shock, and this is important, and distribute humanitarian aid if it's possible in their locations. Because Donetsk and Lugansk regions, if you look at map of Ukraine, now they are most hot places together with Mariupol, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy.
Helena, we are all indebted to the work that your team is continuing to do, as you said, in the hardest hit places. Thank you for being with us. People can find out much more about the organization and how to help at healthright.org. Thank you, Helena. And I do want to remind people what you're watching on your screen. President Biden just stepping off of Air Force One. He has landed in Rzeszów, Poland. He was going to be greeted there by the president of Poland, President Duda. However, that's delayed because the Polish president's plane had to return to Warsaw. There was some sort of technical emergency with the plane. He'll be back shortly. They expect a half-hour delay. So now what the president is going to do, is he is going to be briefed on humanitarian efforts on the ground, and then he will visit the 82nd Airborne, and then he will meet with President Duda. You see him there with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. We'll keep an eye on these images closely. We do have some breaking news, as I understand, just into CNN. Okay, I'm just hearing Democratic Senator Joe Manchin has just confirmed that he will vote yes on Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination to the Supreme